Welcome back to America Decides. Thank you very much for staying with us. We're following today's argument at the Supreme Court over birthright citizenship and whether or not federal district court injunctions go too far. 22 states on the matter of birthright citizenship have challenged the president's directive to do away with that, which, of course, is enshrined in the 14th Amendment. I'm joined now by Washington State Attorney General Nicholas Brown, who is one of several Democratic state attorneys general challenging the Trump administration's efforts heard by the Supreme Court today to significantly rewrite the definition and application of the concept of birthright citizenship. Mr. Attorney General, good to see you. I'll give the audience a brief run through your resume. Harvard Law School, U.S. Judge Advocate General, U.S. Attorney. In your experience in the law, did you ever imagine there'd come a day in this country where we would be revisiting Supreme Court precedent and the 14th Amendment as regards birthright citizenship?
No, absolutely not, and thank you for having me, but never in my wildest dreams, from law school to this point now as the Attorney General from my home state, did I imagine that the president, with the stroke of a pen, would try to redefine what it means to be an American in this country and would try to strip away the rights and liberties and protection of children in our country who are guaranteed citizenship. But that is exactly what the president did, and that is exactly why we had to sue, and that is exactly what the arguments were this morning in front of the Supreme Court.
Based on your witnessing of those arguments, what is your gut sense about where this is heading?
Well, the arguments today were principally focused on whether or not the ruling in Washington state and the ruling in Massachusetts should apply to the states that participated in that litigation, or whether or not it should apply to only individuals who bring cases. So the court really divided most of their attention to the argument about the scope of nationwide injunctions. And you could see the justices really struggle with some of the arguments that the Department of Justice was making on behalf of the president about why, in this particular case, that they should try to narrow the scope of nationwide injunctions. Because really, when you get down to the heart of it, it's kind of absurd. The idea that if you are born in my home state of Washington, that you are an American citizen, but the second that you cross across our border to Idaho, that you would lose your citizenship automatically, or that if you're born in New Jersey and you move across to Philadelphia, that you would no longer be an American. And that's just kind of absurd. And you could see the court, that really justices of all stripes kind of struggle with that issue. But at the heart is really the president's attempt to undermine and erase birthright citizenship. And so that wasn't the principal argument today. But you could see many justices on the bench today really start to press the Department of Justice and the Solicitor General on the constitutionality of what the president did, because 150 years of Supreme Court precedent, statutory action, and all sorts of legal scholarship has all confirmed that, you know, what we said in court today has been the law of the land, and I feel very confident that the court will ultimately uphold that ruling.
If you'd be so kind, Mr. Attorney General, since you're the first African-American Attorney General in Washington State history, briefly educate my audience about how this all got started. When the colonies first settled, they inherited Great Britain's application of the law. Birthright citizenship wasn't called it then, was accepted. Many states had it, but did not recognize it for enslaved Americans. Then you had the Dred Scott decision, then the Civil War, 14th Amendment, and Supreme Court testing of it afterwards. Help my audience understand the scope of what birthright citizenship has meant historically in our country.
Well, sure. As I said, you know, really birthright citizenship goes back about 150 years in America. It was not part of our original founding documents, but it was enshrined in the Constitution in the 14th Amendment, the Citizenship Clause, which was part of the scope of civil rights amendments that were addressing the rights of newly freed black Americans in this country to make sure that there was no question about their citizenship. But since that time, the Supreme Court, and not one, but up to 4 Supreme Court decisions, has reaffirmed that if you're born in America, you are a citizen. There's a very famous case from the 1800s, the Wong Kim Ark case, that really dealt with this issue, dealing with the children of people whose parents were from China. But there have been subsequent Supreme Court decisions and appellate court decisions all across the country in different jurisdictions that have built upon that precedent. So the arguments that we were making in court today were not new arguments, but instead that the arguments that were being advanced by the President and the Department of Justice, they have now grown from what was a very fringe, kind of absurd legal theory to one that's advocated now by the President of the United States. But again, there's no legal basis for that. It's a very sort of strained argument, and I could see that once the court reaches those issues, that they'll reaffirm what we already know.
And what is your biggest fear about where the court could come down on this?
Well, my fear is sort of twofold. One, that if they ruled against Washington or other state partners, that they would empower this president to continue his lawlessness. And frankly, it makes me a little sad that a large part of my job now is to protect American citizens from their president, where we should be focused on all the bread and butter issues that people are most concerned about. But time and time again, we're seeing a president ignore the Constitution, ignore congressional authority and statutory authority, and simply do what he wants and what he thinks is right. And so my fear, in part, is that we would see the court sort of give strength to the president's arguments and to his lack of restraint. So that's one part of it. But more broadly, at the base of this case, it's about children and families. And I am really afraid that if the Supreme Court did what the president is asking them to do, that they would be stripping those guarantees from children in our country, and it would undermine the fabric of our democracy. And that would really cause harms not only to Washington, but to all of our fellow states, where we would have to then provide for the care of those individuals that are no longer going to be protected by the federal government. And so it does real damage to our democracy. It emboldens a president who doesn't really care much about the Constitution. And most importantly, it affects children and their families, or families and their children here in America.
Can I ask, before I let you go, very quickly, a real quick question, Mr. Attorney General. How is it that a president with executive order, any president, could rewrite the Constitution and existing statute? Because as I understand it, there's the 14th Amendment and enabling legislation.
Yeah, there's the Immigration and Nationalization Act, which reaffirms some of these very same principles. But I think, if we've got one consistent principle over the first 4 months of the president's administration, is that he doesn't care much about congressional authority. When he cuts off grant funding to states that has been allocated and approved by Congress, he's undermining their authority as well. And he's doing that again with the birthright citizenship order. But, I've been Attorney General just since January 15th of this year. We filed our 19th case against the president. And frankly, I'd rather that we didn't have to do that. But when the president acts like he's above the law, we cannot abide by that. We have to challenge that because there's real harm being done to individuals in our states across this country. And frankly, if I was in Congress, I would be upset that the president sort of disregards statutory authority and precedent to do what he wants and doesn't abide by our separation of powers and our three branches of government. And I try really hard not to sound like an alarmist. If you talked a little bit about my resume, I started my legal career in uniform, serving my country. But we are in an alarming moment in America where the president time and time again has sort of shredded the Constitution, acts unilaterally, and we can't allow that to happen any longer.
Washington State Attorney General Nicholas Brown. Mr. Attorney General, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate it.